Well, it's been over 13 years since the first Avatar hit theaters and went on to monumental success. And with James Cameron being known to deliver some of the best sequels ever created, does the long-awaited sequel to the highest-grossing film of all time possibly have a chance to meet expectations? What's going on, guys, and welcome to my review of Avatar: The Way of Water, a movie that I thought I might never talk about. I mean, I feel like I've been talking about this movie or hearing about this movie since I've started YouTube. There's been so many rumors and delays and pushes to where these 4 upcoming Avatar sequels seemed like something that James Cameron was just going to be working on, and they would never actually get done. But as I've said before, it is not a good business to doubt the great James Cameron, a guy who has delivered some of the most celebrated films of all time: Terminator and Terminator 2, True Lies, Aliens, Titanic. I mean, the guy just does not know how to lose. But even with that being said, I've always liked the first Avatar, never been a gigantic fan of it. I think visually it was really interesting, and the world building front, it was really an achievement. There's some really neat ideas in there, but story, characters, even the world of Pandora to an extent, it's just not really my thing. So as much as it's a really good movie, it's always been one of my least favorite of James Cameron's films. And so my anticipation, my hype for this sequel has never really gotten that high. It's been more so curiosity than hype. Well, I finally got to check it out last night. I went to see this on the world's tallest IMAX screen, so I might have had one of the very few experiences of the best possible way to watch this movie. And now the question remains, is this a movie that was worth waiting 13 years for? So starting right off with the positives, of course, it's the visuals. It's the massive scale, it's the 3D technology, it's the CG technology that he uses. I mean, you're not gonna see or hear any review on Avatar: The Way of the Water that does not immediately jump in to how unbelievable the visuals are with this movie. I'm not lying. It might be the most visually stunning thing I've ever seen on a screen. I saw it on a massive screen, huge surround sound. The IMAX 3D is much better quality 3D than most cameras, most projectors in theaters. So it was visually dazzling. The entire movie from the beginning to the end, especially when you get into the water sequences, which was kind of the big innovation this time around that James Cameron was taking his time with, figuring out how to get cameras and the 3D technology under the water. Whenever you get into all of that, I mean, you're just sitting there just in awe the entire time of how the characters look, of how the water itself looks, how these sea creatures look, all the swimming sequences and the battle sequences and the action sequences. It's unlike anything you have ever seen, which I unfortunately did not have the experience of watching the first Avatar in theaters. I didn't have much interest in it in the time, and then eventually years later watched it on Blu-ray. Kicked myself in the ass because I'm sure that was the similar experience that everybody had back in 2009, but no exaggeration. On a visual front, this movie is an achievement in and of itself that I have never seen a movie reach the heights that this one does. And I'm somebody that does not like 3D. I have never once in my life, going all the way back to 2009, when the first Avatar created that gigantic trend where every fucking movie had to have post-converted 3D, I have never once bought a 3D ticket unless that was the last showing available. And that is absolutely the way you have to watch this movie, because it's not the old cheap 3D where things are just kind of coming out at you, you know, Friday the 13th 3D style. It's just the depth where you see the water and you see things far away and there's things that look closer, and it just adds this immersion to the world where you feel like you're in the water, like you feel like you can taste the salt of the sea. I mean, it's just so immersive and amazing the way that the unprecedented level of CG that he brings to this mixes with the unprecedented level of 3D to just give this entirely immersive experience. And of course, being that it's James Cameron, the movie is going to be a gigantic, crowd-pleasing blockbuster, and it succeeds on pretty much everything you would want from that. It's a pretty accessible story that I think everybody can appeal to. There's some really big emotions in the movie with certain characters, and of course, the action scenes, the spectacle is all there. There's things from the first act, there's things in the second act, especially with like the world building of the water side of Pandora, and then the third act, especially the last hour or so, is just action extravaganza. I mean, explosions, things under the water, things above the water, things in ships, on ships. I mean, it's it's entertaining. You can tell it that. It's entertaining. And I have to give credit where credit is due as well, especially in the time that we live in, to where it seems like a decent amount of art, especially in movies and TV, seem to start pushing agendas a lot more nowadays than ever before. There's always been subtext, there's always been commentary, but nowadays there seems to be some things that are just greenlit just for the message. And it's undeniable that Avatar is a really important thing to James Cameron, to where he is basically dedicated the rest of his life to building these movies and building this world because he wants to get this environmental activism message out there. In the first film, it was about preserving forests. This one's about preserving the ocean. Presumably in the next 3 movies, if we get all 3 of them, there's going to be different aspects of environmental protection and, valuing the earth, valuing the planet that you work on, that you live on. And so I appreciate the fact that both of these movies thus far is not overly heavy-handed with this message. It's clear, it's crystal clear, it is right there on the surface. You don't have to dig too far for it, but it's not a movie that just hammers you over the head with it. And so I think that it's one of those times where there's a very clear message by the filmmaker that's very important to them, that's probably the main objective of the film, if anything else. But you can just watch the movie, be entertained by it, and not be distracted by all of that if you're not really buying into it, or if you're not into that message, or if you're against that message for any reason. Anytime I bring this type of stuff up in a review, it doesn't seem like this should have to be stated. It should have to be in the positive column, but we've all seen a handful of movies over the past 5 to 7 years where yeah, it needs to be stated. It's entertaining, it doesn't bog down the movie. And now moving on to the mixed aspects of Avatar: The Way of Water, and unfortunately my bigger issue with the first Avatar film kind of carries over to this one. I don't know if I could say it's done better here. It's kind of done the same for me, just differently, and that's the characters and the story. Now, I do think that the 13-year gap hurts the characters more than anything else. Maybe when we get into Avatar 3 and 4, this will go away because we won't have waited over a decade to see what these characters are up to. But Jake Sully, Neytiri, all these characters that were kind of the main linchpins of the story of the first film, never found them to be overly exciting of characters or overly interesting. They're fine, they're serviceable for sure, and they're performed well, especially Neytiri. I think that what Zoe Saldana brings is actually one of the better motion capture performances that we've seen outside of Planet of the Apes. And so you get to this movie and we haven't seen these characters in over a decade. You immediately get back into them and it starts to develop out this family side of those two characters, what they've been doing in the time since we have seen them. And they have kids and they've grown as people, and so there is development there. But as the movie goes along, I still just don't really feel all that connected to either of the two main characters. And even all the kids that kind of get propped up to be more the main characters in this movie than Jake and Neytiri, they're good characters, but I still feel at arm's distance with them. I don't know if it's because they're all CG characters. I would hesitate to say that because I've seen movies where I really get invested in CG characters, but there's something about the Na'vi characters in these movies so far that I'm just not all that invested in them. They're not characters that I'm going to really hold my breath and cry over whenever they're in danger. And that's something that I'm missing in these movies. Going along with that, probably one of the reasons why I'm at arm's distance is the story. Now, the first movie, the biggest criticism with it is that it just followed this very popular template of this story that we've seen in Dances with Wolves and Fern Gully and The Last Samurai, to where you get this soldier that is sent into this indigenous area by the military to kind of infiltrate, learn all their secrets, and be the inside man, and then he kind of gets won over by their culture, won over by one of their people, and then turns and helps them fight against the people that he was originally sent by. We've seen that template of story a dozen times, and I think Avatar does well with it, but it was absolutely a story we have seen a bunch of times. There was not really any surprises there anywhere along the way. You get to this film, and it doesn't follow a template of any story. It doesn't have that problem, but the main story beats that we go through, the main kind of themes of the story, are still very basic and very familiar. I mean, these are things that we have still seen time and time again. One of the bigger ones that I kept kind of going back to when I was watching The Way of Water is The Patriot with Mel Gibson. There's a lot of elements in here about Jake Sully kind of being unwilling, unwanting to fight in this war anymore and wants to just protect his family and kind of let everybody else do the fighting. And he has a lot of turmoil with his older sons that don't have that outlook, that want to go fight, that want to go lay their life on the line. And so that was the biggest theme to me that I kind of latched into with this movie that felt very reminiscent of that film. And so even with this being a slightly more unique movie in that it doesn't follow a template and it does go in some different directions that maybe you won't see coming, there's still a lot about the story that feels familiar, feels like we've been there, done that. So I'm just a little bit disappointed. As much as the story and the characters are serviceable, as much as I would say that they're good, I wouldn't say it's bad. If we have visuals and spectacle and immersion on this next level, I just wish the story and the characters would get there at some point, because that's what's going to make an Avatar movie that I really love. I'm a story guy. I'm a characters guy. As much as I love visuals, as much as I love the escapism and I can go on this roller coaster ride, if you don't have that story and character element, you're only going to get me so far. And now moving on to the negatives, and I'll get the little ones out first. And I don't really feel that invested or that interested or that captivated by the villain of this movie. And it's not a spoiler. It's in the trailers. It's a pretty well-known fact. Stephen Lang's character is coming back. I believe Cameron said he's going to be the villain of this entire franchise, so get ready to see that character a lot. But the way that, they bring him back, and that's cool. I love Stephen Lang. I thought he was entertaining in the first film, but his motivation for this is essentially just revenge for the events of the first film. And it's not even really fleshed out all that much. It's just like he's brought back, hey, this is what happened. This is the guy that did it. Okay, well, I'm going to go fuck that guy up. And that's 3 hours of just that. And sometimes that can be an interesting motivation. Here, I feel like it leaves his character a little bit underdeveloped. I would say all the characters in the movie to a degree are underdeveloped, but especially Stephen Lang's character. He just doesn't really feel like there's anything brought to him as a villain, as the main evil force of the movie that merits him presumably being the main villain of this entire franchise. And all throughout the movie, his presence is just kind of one note. There's also a character called Spider, who is a human boy that was left over from the Sky people in the first film, and he kind of integrates himself into the Na'vi. He's kind of like Mowgli. He's a boy, he's a human, but he's feral. He thinks he's an animal. He thinks he's one of the Na'vi. And I did not like his character at all. I didn't like what they did with him in the story. I didn't really like the shtick of the character. I found it kind of borderline annoying where, he's this boy with the dreadlocks. Like I said, very Mowgli. So that got on my nerves a little bit throughout the movie. But beyond that, just what they do with him throughout the story, it was very hard to follow what this character was, what his motivations was, what his morals were. There was no compass. There was no way to really identify what this character is, who he is, what's he going to do, and why is he doing what he's doing. And so all throughout the movie, and he's in a lot of it, every single time he's there doing something, I'm confused about why he's doing that thing. And I'm confused about what is he feeling in this moment? Is he feeling conflicted? Is he feeling like he's turning to do all this stuff? Does he feel like he's being pulled to that direction? Like everything. I never could figure out what the hell was going on with this character. All the way up to the end of the movie, which I'm not going to get specific with, but he makes a decision that infuriated me. Where I'm like, dude, that makes zero fucking sense for your character to do. And if you do feel that way, you have done none of the work whatsoever to convince me that character would do that thing. And now with those out of the way, the two biggest issues with this movie. The length. Now, I am not somebody that complains about 3-hour movies. I love when a movie is massive and epic and merits its runtime. And I would say an Avatar movie merits a big runtime. However, because what this movie is bringing is, for the most part, just this visual escapism roller coaster, I do think that the magic of that starts to wear thin in the second act of this film. Whenever you're sitting there it's a 3-hour and 10-minute movie, and you're sitting there for almost an hour straight where there's not a ton of story going on. There's not a ton of character development. There's a little bit, but there's not a ton of that going on in the middle act of the film. And it's mostly just focused on, look how awesome this ocean shit is. Look how cool this sea creature is. Look at how amazing these swimming sequences and these training sequences are. And yes, they look amazing. But after 45 minutes or an hour of it, you've kind of wore out your welcome. It was like being on a roller coaster that's awesome, but the roller coaster lasts 25 minutes and you're like, fuck, let me off. And so I would be lying if I didn't tell you that by the end of the movie, I wasn't a bit exhausted with it. I wasn't a bit visually just overwhelmed. Maybe that's because I watched it in 3D, and 3D is funny with your eyes. Maybe it was just a little bit more demanding on my brain than it will be when we watch it at home, but it's kind of an experience that's made for that. So I wouldn't even say that was a pass, if that is true. It's just a movie that I loved what they were doing. They achieved everything that they were doing, but I didn't need 3 hours and 10 minutes of it. And I think part of what makes it such an exhausting runtime as well is just the structure of the movie. So it's been 13 years since we've been in this world. It's been 13 years since we've seen these characters, and it's been even longer than that within the actual context of the story. And so the first 45 minutes, maybe even the first hour of this movie almost feels like the in-between story, like something that we would have saw like some YouTube video or some shorts on jamescameron.com or something to kind of fill in the gaps. Like it's all of what happened between Avatar 1 and when we get to the actual water, the whole concept and story of this movie. And so you almost feel like you hit the reset button after an hour of the film. Once they actually make the decision that they make and move to this water tribe and start to integrate into them and learn about this whole other world of Pandora, that feels more like the natural beginning of this second story. And so when you're sitting there already for an hour, usually about half the runtime of a normal movie, and it feels like we're just now getting started, you do start to feel a little bit of that, oh, this is going to be a long one. That's going to be different for everybody. Some people are going to be exhausted by the 2-hour mark. Some people would want 5 hours of this movie. But for me, it was at least 20 minutes too much for my taste. And the final negative, which kind of goes along with my mixed aspect of the story, is that this movie very much feels like the first half of a story. It feels like everything that it sets up doesn't necessarily come to a conclusion by the end of this. And if you've researched this movie, if you've listened to James Cameron talk about this at all over the past number of years, he said multiple times that there was originally supposed to be 4 Avatar movies, but when he looked at the script and the story of Avatar 2, he realized there was way too much in that, and that needed to be 2 movies in and of itself. So now there's Avatar 2 through 5 coming. And you really feel that when you get to the end of this movie and you see where they decide to stop the story, where they decide to conclude certain things with certain characters, this very much feels like the first half of something. And I don't like that when I watch a 3-hour and 10-minute movie and I don't feel like I come to a satisfying conclusion by the end of it where I'm like, woo, okay, all right. If you take another 5 years to make Avatar 3, I'm satisfied. I'm at the point with this story where I'm like, okay, Avatar 3, I got questions. I need to see some resolution. So overall, Avatar: The Way of Water is something that I think if you are into Avatar, if you were excited, or if you were curious about this at all, you have to go and see it on the biggest screen possible and in 3D if you can tolerate 3D. It's one of those movies that is made for the theatrical experience, which we have to support those movies. You have to cherish those because we're getting to those times to where studios and the people that sign the checks want everything to be on the small screen. They want everything to be at home for the most part. And I, for one, cherish the theatrical experience. So when you get movies like Top Gun Maverick, when you get movies like Avatar: The Way of Water, if you are interested in it, please go and see it, put the money down and support it. And I think most people that watch this, if you are into Avatar, will like this as much, if not maybe a little bit more than the first film. If you're not into Avatar and you don't like it at all, there's not really anything in this movie that's going to sell you on it that the first movie didn't already. And so for me personally, it was a really cool experience. It's one of the better movies of the year for sure, and it delivers what I expect James Cameron to deliver. And so I'm more satisfied than I am not. But I am not quite at a point to where I'm ready to agree with the fact that James Cameron is giving us nothing but Avatar for the rest of his career. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for the playlist of all of my other 2022 new release reviews, and I'm also going to put my video up here of my top 50 action films of all time, of which you will see a number of James Cameron films on that list. Please like and share this video, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future, as well as my James Cameron ranking in a couple of days. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.